Here we go again.
Get your trousers on. You're nicked.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cine-Podcast. My name is Pete. As usual, I will be your host for the next hour or so as we look at different genres of movies and some movie news coming out of Hollywood.
I'm the last man alive, and I can do everything I've always wanted.
Here we are with episode 2 of the Cine-Podcast. Again, I am Pete, as it says in the intro. That intro music, by the way, is by a band called Blood Dragon, or I think it was Blood Dragon or Blood something. I got it for free on the free music archives, I think it is. I recorded this yesterday, and when I went to transfer it to my computer, I pressed delete, completely erasing everything that I did yesterday. It was about an hour's worth of a show that just completely went out the window because I'm a fucking idiot. But we'll try this again. Episode 2. It's actually a good idea that I'm doing this again because I wasn't overly fussed on what I recorded yesterday. But this gives me a second chance to redo it. So there we go. Today's show is all about post-apocalypse movies. When I originally set up my website for writing reviews, I set it up because I was going to squarely focus on the post-apocalyptic genre, which is why I started. So I think one of my first reviews was for George Romero's Survival of the Dead. But then obviously it took on a life of its own, and I started reviewing whatever I could get, or whatever I watched, whatever I could get sent to me. Some pretty cool films I got in the post from some production companies, or distribution companies, sorry. But yeah, the site started off primarily as a review site for post-apocalypse movies. And here we are, 7, nearly 8 years later, and I am doing a podcast. So we're going to start with some movie news like I did last week. This is going to be a segment at the beginning of every show. So roll the jingle. So, this week, news story numero uno is Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey is, he was supposed to star in Ridley Scott's new film, which was called For All the Money in the World, or All the Money in the World, about John Paul Getty, or J. Paul Getty. Now, since the allegations of his alleged sexual abuse of Broadway actor Anthony Rapp, Ridley Scott has made the conscious decision to reshoot all of Spacey's scenes with Christopher Plummer. Now, Christopher Plummer, what I read, was the original choice for the role of J. Paul Getty, but the studio decided they wanted to go with someone who was a bit more bankable. Obviously, at the time, House of Cards was riding high and everything. This was before all the allegations came out. So the studio decided to go with Kevin Spacey. And that backfired on him, obviously. So yeah, Ridley Scott will be reshooting all of Spacey's scenes for All the Money in the World, starting on November the 20th with Christopher Plummer in the role of John Paul Getty, which is I can completely understand why they do it, why he decided to do it. You don't particularly want a certain film coming out during a period where the actor is being vilified, because that's going to ruin box office chances and the profit that the film could make. But we'll see how that goes. The only thing I'm worried about is that Christopher Plummer starts shooting on the 20th of November, and I think All the Money in the World had a release date, which I don't think has changed yet, had a release date of December the 11th. So that gives them 21 days, fingers crossed, to reshoot, re-edit, change promotional material and everything to get the film in cinemas for that date. Whether or not they'll change it, we don't know, but we'll see. Next news item is Star Wars Episode 8 writer-director Rian Johnson has been given by Disney and Lucasfilm a completely blank slate to come up with a brand new Star Wars trilogy.
Holy shit.
This trilogy obviously will not center on Luke, Leia, Han, and Rey, and all those characters from the trilogy, well, from the saga that was started with George Lucas in 1977. This is going to be a completely new trilogy with new characters. Whether or not Rian Johnson will go and have a look at the Star Wars Extended Universe, which covers books and games and all that jazz stuff. But I don't know, it could be interesting to see whether or not people will go and see Star Wars movies that, a Star Wars trilogy that doesn't follow the characters that we all know, like Luke, Han, Chewie, R2, C-3PO, those characters. If Rogue One is anything to go by, yes, it did have Darth Vader in it, but if Rogue One's anything to go by, people will go and see it, but we don't know. But it'd be interesting to see what Rian Johnson does with it. Episode 8 is yet to come out. Well, I think it's the 15th, maybe, the 15th of December that Episode 8 is released. I'm looking forward to it. But we'll see. We'll see where Rian Johnson goes with this new, completely original trilogy that he's been given a blank slate to create. It shows that Disney and Lucasfilm have enough faith in him with Episode 8 to give him an entire new segment of that universe to develop by himself. But we'll see. We don't know. Episode 8 may be a flop. I doubt it because it's Star Wars. But there we go. That's something we can look forward to in the near future. Final news story is fitting for this episode. The reason we haven't seen another Mad Max film since Fury Road, which I was looking forward to because I'm a huge Mad Max fan. That was one of the reasons the site started, because of my love for Mad Max. And I absolutely adored Fury Road. I saw it in the cinema. Unfortunately, I saw it in 3D. And as a person who has to wear glasses, watching Fury Road in 3D, everything with 3D glasses, everything goes dark. So I was watching this vibrant, gorgeously photographed, colourful action extravaganza, and the 3D glasses tinted everything, so it brought the contrast down, and the cinema experience was kind of ruined because of that. But watching it on Blu-ray with a 5.1 surround or 7.1 surround completely changed that. But the reason we haven't seen a second Mad Max film with Tom Hardy from George Miller this year is because George Miller is apparently suing Warner Brothers for money that is owed to them by the studio. Money is owed to Kennedy Miller Mitchell, which is the production company that Miller set up with his longtime collaborator. I can't remember his first name, but something Mitchell. The Kennedy is obviously for George Kennedy. Who is it? George Kennedy? I can't remember. It was the two who set up the production company originally to make the original Mad Max movies, but they're suing Warner Brothers for money that is owed to them, which they were told would be given to them. I think it's $7 million or something. $7 million. If Fury Road came in under budget, which apparently it did. If it came in under 157 million, I think it was 150 million. So it was 7 million that they were supposed to use that they didn't, that was going to be given to them as a bonus. And everyone knows Fury Road was a huge success. It was a critical success. I think it got something like 7 or 8 Oscars in like cinematography and sound design and costumes and all that jazz. It was critical acclaimed. It made 347 million, I think it was, worldwide. For a film that is a sequel to a movie that last came out in 1985. So that's pretty cool. I mean, Rambo 4 didn't even make that much money on a film that came out I think it was 1987 was Rambo 3. I'm not entirely sure, but that's the reason we haven't seen a second Tom Hardy Mad Max movie, is because George Miller is currently suing Warner Brothers. Hopefully that'll be settled quickly and Miller can continue giving us Tales from the Wasteland. But Miller is in his 70s now, so whether or not he can carry on doing it, we don't know. But if he continues to make Mad Max movies, then that's absolutely fine with me. He can take my money. So that's the news. Let's roll the jingle, the outro jingle. So there we go. This is episode 2. We're going to be looking at some post-apocalypse movies. Yesterday when I recorded this originally, I wrote a list of 5 movies that I wanted to cover, but I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to bother doing that. I'm just going to talk about post-apocalypse movies. Whether or not I talk about Damnation Alley, Dr. Strangelove, Testament, Mad Max, the Italian films like Escape from the Bronx, Bronx Warriors, what was the other one? Warriors of the Wasteland, I think it was called. There's another one, 2019, Fall of New York. Rats, which is another Italian film. Night of Terror, which is a terrible movie. I think it was a Bruno Mattei movie. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. But then there's also the British ones, like I'm going to go with some TV shows like Survivors, the original BBC version of Survivors from 1975, which is grim. Threads. The Day After. What else is there? Just the whole host of post-apocalypse awesomeness. I mean, there's a lot of shit. I mean, I think there was in the 80s, Ciro H. Santiago, I think the name of the director was, made a whole series of these Filipino financed and shot post-apocalypse movies that completely ripped off the Italian ones. I didn't mean the Italian ones. I meant completely ripped off Mad Max. And yeah, there was a lot of them. I mean, he was making one not so long ago before he died, which I can't remember what it was called. It starred Michael Madsen, but I don't think it ever got a release in the end. But yeah, there was a lot of those Filipino type post-apocalyptic rip-offs of Mad Max. But we'll get into other types of stuff soon. One of my favorite aspects of post-apocalypse movies, not necessarily like the Mad Max type of ones where it's like a complete wasteland, but I really like seeing the downfall of civilization. I know that sounds quite dark and depressing, just wanting to see civilization just go fucking die in the corner. For me, there's a sort of isolation to it. The way the Brits do post-apocalypse is better than most people do, and by that I mean when you look at the UK. I mean, the UK is essentially just a green country. We don't have a desert or anything, so our apocalypse, our sort of end of the world, usually takes place inside the English countryside. So you've got fields of just green fields and backwoods areas, and sometimes the main characters will come across a stone cottage just out in the middle of nowhere, where there'd be one crazy guy in there who's suffering from rabies or something. I'm actually describing an episode of Survivors here, but that's probably the most apocalyptic type of episode of that show. But that's the kind of thing you'd see. I mean, the same thing with Day of the Triffids, the BBC adaptation of that in the 1980s, 1983 I think it was, and just that whole idea of the UK being a wasteland, but it doesn't so much work nowadays. I mean, they did a remake of Day of the Triffids with Eddie Izzard and Dougray Scott a couple of years ago, and yeah, it had a post-apocalyptic feel to it, but it still just looked sort of, I don't know, it looked modern. It didn't look like it should. Same with there's another one as well, the remake, BBC One's remake of Survivors, which they did in I think it was 2007, 2008, around about that time, which it starred Patterson Joseph and Max Beasley. I mean, when you compare the remake of Survivors to the original, the Terry Nation version of Survivors, it's very there's a very different style to that. I mean, with the remake, there was more of a conspiracy behind it, but with the original one, it was literally just about surviving the end of the world. If you get a chance to check out the original 1975 version of Survivors, then I highly recommend it. It lasted for 3 seasons, or 3 series, not seasons. We're not in America. Series over here. The second the remake lasted for 2. I think it was 2. But if you're going to go with one, I'd stick with the 1975 BBC version, because that is a much better, grimmer depiction of a post-apocalyptic Britain, post-virus Britain. And again, like we do the end of the world in the grimmest way possible. I think it was 1983. The US released the television movie The Day After, which was obviously it looked at the after effects of a nuclear attack on America, and it's a good film. It's a good television movie. It was starred, who was it? Jason Robards, Steve Guttenberg. I think Bernie Casey was in it. But was it Bernie Casey? I can't remember now. But again, yeah, I mean, it was a good film. But then the same year, BBC brought out a television film called Threads, which looked at the aftermath of a nuclear attack on the UK, specifically Sheffield. And it was just another level of grimness. I mean, yes, in The Day After, there are scenes where people are suffering from radiation poisoning and everything, but because it's the US and most of it takes place in, I think it was Kansas, somewhere like that, you've got these massive wheat fields and everything that just looks like, it looks American, whereas Threads, it looked just horrible, just grim. There's like dead animals that are festering with maggots and stuff and radiation. There's like just mud and dirt and just everyone's blacked up. Not blacked up, but like muddy faces and stuff. And it just, yeah, it just, whereas like the US version of a nuclear fallout was very Hollywood, the British version of a nuclear fallout is very much more like documentary style. I mean, we do the end of the world really well. I mean, we've got quite a few. We've got Threads. We've got the wonderful animated movie When the Wind Blows, which was based on a book, I think, by Raymond Briggs, and was the same animation, I believe. So Raymond Briggs did The Snowman, which, if you grew up in the 80s, that's what you watched every Christmas. But he also did When the Wind Blows, and that is a depressing sort of look at the post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear Britain, which follows 2 old people living in a cottage in the middle of the English countryside, and how they deal with the fallout. Like, I mean, she carries on like washing dishes and cleaning the table and stuff like that, when there's like, it's just an obliterated wasteland outside. So if you can track down When the Wind Blows, which I do believe is on, I think it's on YouTube. I can't remember. I had to, unfortunately, I had to use a torrent for it, but I did find it. And there was another one as well, which I think is out of print now, called The War Game, which I think is a shorter film. I think it's only 60 minutes. It's like a docudrama about the effects of nuclear fallout in the UK. But yeah, I mean, we tend to do the end of the world in a less Hollywoodized style. Our way of doing it is to make everything super grim, super depressing, super real. Whereas the American way of doing nuclear fallout is like The Day After and Jericho, the television show Jericho, which I can't believe it got cancelled, brought back, and then cancelled again, because it was a fantastic show. But again, it was very much a Hollywoodized depiction of nuclear fallout. But comparing the US to the UK, it's a little bit because we've always done things more real. I mean, there's a British kitchen sink drama as opposed to Americans' Lifetime movies. It's like ours are more grounded in reality, whereas the Lifetime movies, even though they are based on real life events, there's a Hollywood style to them. Whereas in the UK, like real life stories are treated more in a kind of docudrama, sort of realistic way. But I'm not talking about like kitchen sink dramas. I'm talking about the end of the world type of movies. But then everything changed. Obviously, we all know everything changed in 1979 when George Miller brought out the very first Mad Max movie. Mad Max was a post-apocalyptic film that was high on adrenaline. I'm struggling here. I'm still full up with guitar. It was high on adrenaline, and it's just a fast-paced, very cool movie that bombed outside of Australia. I mean, in 1979. I mean, when it opened in America, the Americans dubbed the audio, which was already in English, with American accents, and it just sounded ridiculous. But when you watch the original Australian language, I can't even believe I'm saying Australian language because it's not an Australian language. It's English, but with an Australian accent. It's very clear to understand. But I think Mad Max found its audience, kind of found its audience on, I think it was home video maybe, but maybe it would have been before. No, it would have been, I don't know how it would have made enough money to garner the sequel. But when it did, it must have made enough money to garner, well, to warrant Warner Brothers ponying up cash for the Road Warrior. I think they did. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember 100%. But the Road Warrior is like the pinnacle of post-apocalypse action, whereas something like what is it? Something like Doctor Strangelove is like the pinnacle of post or post nuclear comedy, like The Bed Sitting Room. Like there's another one, The Bed Sitting Room, which I think was a Spike Milligan film, and then there's a Boy and His Dog, which are post-apocalypse films, but they have a comedic edge to them. Another good example of a comedy post-apocalypse film is Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Eat left, froggies!
Which is the film that starred WWE superstar Rowdy Roddy Piper, who was also Nada in John Carpenter's They Live. And that's another like ridiculously crazy like sci-fi comedy, post-apocalyptic comedy. Six String Samurai was another good example of a comedy set in a post-apocalyptic landscape. I'm trying to think what else there is now. There's quite a few good comedy films that are set in a post-apocalyptic world. I mean, you could go by decade and we could go by decade and have a look at the post-apocalyptic films of each decade. So if we started with the 1950s, I'd say the first film that would be high on anyone who likes post-nuclear Holocaust movies should definitely see a film called Five. Has the distinction of being the first film to depict post-nuclear Holocaust wasteland, or America, if you will. It was made in 1951 and shot in stark black and white. The production design is fantastic and everything. And like I said, that's like if you're getting into post-nuclear Holocaust movies, then that should be your starting point. It's a very difficult film to find, but I think it's on YouTube to rent for $2.49 in the UK, so it's probably like $5 or something in the US. I'm not sure what the ratio between pound and the dollar is at the moment, but Five should be at the top. That's a film made in 1951. It was directed by a man called Arch Oboler. another good example of not necessarily apocalypse, but you can use apocalypse as like a word to describe these type of films. So like an invasion movie, like alien invasion movie, would again be a sort of apocalyptic kind of act, well, event, if you know what I mean. So something like George Pal's War of the Worlds, that has an alien invasion where cities are destroyed and everything. That's a 50s movie. Another one would be Invasion USA, which is sort of like a 1950s version of Red Dawn. Again, Red Dawn, which I will get to in a bit. Those type of films like Red Dawn and Tomorrow When the War Began, and I think there's another one as well. I can't remember. Invasion USA, the 1985 film, not the 1950s version, the 1985 film, which is a Chuck Norris movie, is one definitely worth checking out. But again, like 1950s was a time when there was a lot of like things was being tried for the first time. So you didn't really have any science fiction in the 30s or 40s. I mean, maybe the early 30s you had Things to Come, which is a decent movie for when it was made. But when you move from the 50s to the 60s, another 50s film that is highly recommended, if you can find a copy of it, is The World, the Flesh and the Devil, which was made in 1958 and starred Harry Belafonte, Inga Stevens and Mel Ferrer. That is a film which is absolutely wonderful. It's just a three-hander all the way through it. The opening of it reminds me of Will Smith's version of not even Will Smith's version. It reminds me of the opening of the Omega Man and the opening half of I Am Legend. But moving from the 50s into the 60s with films such as The Day the Earth Caught Fire, which shows the build-up to essentially the end of the world. There was another one as well, which was... oh, God. I'm drawing a complete blank now. I did have these written down, but I've lost the piece of paper that had it written on. So we'll skip on. The next one is like a vampire film. I Am Legend. Everyone who knows I Am Legend knows that it's originally based on a vampire film, and the only films that actually make it as a vampire film is the original one, which starred Vincent Price, called The Last Man on Earth. That was made in 1964. That was directed by an Italian in Italy, but it was written by the author of the novel, Richard Matheson, who, if you know who Richard Matheson is, then thumbs up. If you don't, he's a well-known science fiction writer. Wrote I Am Legend, wrote The Incredible Shrinking Man, lots of episodes of The Twilight Zone, and so on and so on. Richard Matheson is a top writer. Check out his stuff if you can. Just Google Richard Matheson and his stuff will come up. And some other good end of the world, so Last Man on Earth type of films from that era, from the 1960s, would be like the creature features that Roger Corman made, like The Day the World Ended, or is it Attack of the Giant Leeches? Did he do that? I think it was Attack of the Giant Leeches, but I don't think that was End of the World. But Day the World Ended is very high on that list of 1960s apocalypse type of films. There is also I think it was from the 60s or maybe the late 50s, 1958, I think it might have been, was the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is a paranoid sort of thriller about an alien invasion, which is highly recommended if you haven't seen that. Also highly recommended is the 1978 remake with Donald Sutherland. And maybe not as highly recommended, but recommended if you like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is Abel Ferrara's 1993 remake Body Snatchers, which is also a pretty cool film. Ignore the Nicole Kidman version from 2004, Invasion. There's 2005, I can't remember. So those are the films you would have had in the 60s, like the B-movie type of stuff. And it wasn't until you got to the 1970s where you started to see more and more of these end-of-the-world type of films. So you'd have a lot of films like, oh, what is it? Like Logan's Run is essentially an end of the world movie. It's a post-apocalypse movie. It's a fucking great movie as well, by the way. So you got like Logan's Run, the Omega Man, the Ultimate Warrior, Ravagers, Mad Max. What else is there? God, there's so many. I'm drawing a complete blank now. But yeah. I completely ignored 1968. 1968, you had Night of the Living Dead, probably one of the most important horror films in history, came out. So you had that one, George Romero's classic zombie, where it basically invented the zombie genre. You had, what else was there in 1970s? 1978, you had George Romero's sequel to Night of the Living Dead, which was Dawn of the Dead.
When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk here.
But you also had a Romero film called The Crazies, which was about a virus again, which could be looked at as an apocalyptic movie. I'm not going to look at like the end of the world movies that are like biblical, so stuff like The Omen, which is essentially, you could say The Omen was an apocalypse movie, or The Exorcist, which was a sort of apocalypse movie. But yeah, I'm looking at like the straight up end of the world type of Last Man on Earth, post-nuclear fallout, blah 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 blah, those type of ones. So in the 70s you had the Omega Man, which was Omega Man is the second adaptation of I Am Legend. It's a good film, but it has aged very badly. Again, I keep missing these out in the 60s. Another film from 1968, the same year as Night of the Living Dead, Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes is probably one of the most famous post-apocalyptic movies of all time. Even when you don't realize what the twist is until the final scene of the movie, it's still like you know that it's a post-apocalyptic film. Planet of the Apes is fantastic. Another good Planet of the Apes film is not Rise of the Planet of the Apes, because that was the reboot. Is Conquest of Planet of the Apes, which is about the ape uprising and how the apes started to take over, which is again, that's kind of like a dystopic sort of setting where there's a government kind of Big Brother watching, like THX 1138, that type of thing. What else is there in the 70s? I should have made a massive list of every film, but then if I did, I'd be here for hours and hours and hours. Let's see what else is there. What am I coming back to? Well, let's skip on to the 80s. The 80s was a big time for the PA movie, PA post-apocalypse movie. So you had like the early times. You had like Escape from New York. You had Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior. You had Thunderdome, which was the third Mad Max film. A whole slew of fucking Italian rip-offs, like Hands of Steel. Is it Hands of Steel or Wheels of Steel? Or Wheels of Fire? I can't remember. What else was there? Contamination, another Italian film. Terminator 2. Terminator 2 came up in 1991. So you had like the Terminator. The Terminator is probably one of the best examples of 80s science fiction, like set in a post-apocalyptic landscape, which is the opening of Terminator 2. And then not Terminator 2, sorry. The opening of Terminator is this like just fucked up future where these robots are just walking around shooting people, standing on skulls, and there's like these hunter-killer spacecrafts chasing these, not spacecrafts, like aircrafts chasing these resistance fighters. That opening of Terminator is amazing. The opening of Terminator 2 is even better. But the opening of Terminator with Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese, and then how it moves from the future, like the end of the world sort of future, to like present day in 1984. Obviously 1984 was present day then, it's not now. I mean, the visual aspect of the visual side of James Cameron's first like big success film is incredible. I mean, you look at that film, look at the budget it was made for, which was barely anything, because it was a low budget science fiction movie with an Austrian bodybuilder playing this unstoppable killing machine. Yes, we know that Arnold had been in some films beforehand, and he did star as Conan in Conan the Barbarian in 1982. But Terminator was kind of where he just took off and became the big star that he is. But yeah, the 80s was great for the type of post-apocalyptic movie, because 84 you had Red Dawn, which I was talking about earlier. Red Dawn is about an invasion of US soil by Russian and Cuban like paramilitary, and how these kids just declared war on them. And it's apocalyptic. It's not post-apocalyptic. It's kind of like invasion apocalyptic. Another really good film from the 80s, which is definitely PA, is the Patrick Swayze film Steel Dawn. Steel Dawn's a very cool film. It's like a martial arts, sword fighting, post-apocalyptic kind of just desert wasteland type of thing. It's great. Another one is Solar Babies. Well, over here it was known as Solar Warriors, because Solar Babies sounds like a fucking stupid title. But yeah, Solar Babies or Solar Warriors, kids on roller skates. Cool film. It's kind of dated a little bit now. Oh god, yeah, the 80s was really cool. The 80s was a great time for PA movies, and then it kind of died a little bit in the 90s. I mean, you had Terminator 2 came out in 91. What else was there? Terminator 2. Yeah, I'll have to do a little bit more research on the 90s, because I can kind of remember the 90s being a bit shit. I mean, you had the live action version of Fist of the North Star with Gary Daniels, but that wasn't great. There was also Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I'm just looking at my DVDs, just trying to spot that one film that is PA compared to other stuff. But then when people started being able to afford digital cameras, like in the year like 2000, between 2000, maybe 2003 to 2014, there was just a fucking load of low budget post-apocalyptic zombie movies and stuff, and a lot of them are shit. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. A lot of them are shit. But there's some decent ones in the mix in the noughties. Good thing to look at now, though, is television. Is how television has kind of embraced this post-apocalyptic kind of filmmaking. You've got a few for shows that are based on comic books, like I think it's Into the Badlands was based on a graphic novel or a series of comic books. I'm not entirely sure. You have The Walking Dead, which is probably one of the biggest shows in the world. It has been since 2011 or 2010 when it came out. It's on the 8th season now, and it seems to just be getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Yes, there are episodes which are a bit filler. This current series I'm not entirely with. I'm watching it, but there doesn't seem to be a coherent plot running through this. Just so far it's been 3 episodes of just all-out war, and I'd like to see a little bit more character, a little bit more story. But again, it's The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead is huge, and it's probably one of the best examples of PA on TV. Another one was 2005 came out, was Jericho, which was about the effects of a nuclear attack on American soil, and how the residents of a small town in Kansas deal with the fallout of that. I mean, it starts off like you would expect. I mean, they didn't get affected by the bomb, so they didn't get destroyed or anything. And it's how that town deals with certain things. So they still go about teaching kids in school and trying to keep the supermarket stocked and stuff. But as things gradually starts to go downhill, as the world becomes as America becomes more of an apocalyptic landscape, when you have marauding bands of thieves and bandits and stuff like that. But Jericho was a fantastic show. It was sad that it got cancelled at the end of the first series, that fans decided to bring it back by sending CBS like thousands and thousands of peanuts, which is in reference to a line at the end of series 1. But then that got brought back for a 7-episode run in season 2, then to be cancelled again. But I think it lived on in a comic book form. But I've not read the comics. So that's another like fantastic TV show that was based in that sort of apocalyptic scenario. Again, there was, what have we done? We've done Into the Badlands. We've done The 100. The 100 is a show I highly recommend. The 100. When I first started watching it, I put it off watching it because it was on the CW, and all the trailers came across as quite sort of like teeny bopperish, and there's a lot of like, because it focuses on 100 teens who are sent to Earth in 100 years after a nuclear war or a nuclear attack or whatever it is, and they're sent to Earth to see if Earth is inhabitable. Well, habitable, not inhabitable. It's habitable. And so I was just thinking, it's a bit like teeny bopperish. I'm gonna try. I'll give it a try. I was hooked from series episode 1. The 100 was badly marketed as, when the first series came out, it was badly marketed as this like teen like love story on Earth. It's the fucking violentest show I have ever seen on television outside of Game of Thrones and some scenes of The Walking Dead. It's just fucking grim. There's people getting arms sliced off, heads sliced off, stabbed, shot, just blood everywhere. And this is fucking aimed at like teenagers, and it's one of the most violent things on television. It's utterly fantastic. And season 4 just ended and left it on a cliffhanger for season 5, which is coming out next year, which I'm really looking forward to now because I've been left on a cliffhanger. But yeah, I highly recommend checking out the 100. I mean, season 3 was a little bit of a letdown, but once you get past season 3, season 4 is incredible. Season 4 just completely kicks the ass of season 3. So yeah, those are some really good like post-apocalyptic TV shows. Some decent like newer movies that have come out, like the Hunger Games were pretty good. I quite enjoyed the Hunger Games movies, even if there are too many of them. There are also the Maze Runner movies. The Maze Runner is pretty good. The Scorch Trials was pretty cool, and I know that the Maze Runner 3, The Death Cure or something, is out next year, and that looks pretty cool. These are more based on like young adult novels than like comic books and stuff like that. But Hunger Games is pretty cool. I mean, it's got a good cast. It's got Jennifer Lawrence in it. It's got Donald Sutherland in it. It's got Stanley Tucci in it. It's got Elizabeth Banks in it. So it's got a great cast. Oh, it's got Toby Jones in it as well. So it's got a great cast. Dylan, whatever his name is, from the TV remake of Teen Wolf, is in the Maze Runner movies, which are pretty cool. Those were directed by a man called Wes Ball. Wes Ball was a CGI artist who made a very short film. I think it was called Run, which was about a guy on a motorbike being chased by something in a post-apocalyptic world. What I'd like to see more video games tackle that kind of thing. Yes, there are a lot of post-apocalyptic games. We know this. There's the Walking Dead games. There's what else is there? There's that new zombie game that's come out, Last Days of something. You've got the zombie one with Dead Rising. There's Dead Island. Again, these are zombie films. But I don't think any game has ever captured the sort of end of the world scenario as well as The Last of Us, which is probably one of the most cinematic games that I've ever played. But the opening of The Last of Us is probably one of the grimmest openings to a video game. You got the opening of Up, the Disney Pixar movie, which is very sad. But then you've got the opening of fucking The Last of Us, which by the end of the opening segment, you're in tears because of like you just watched one of the most horrific things you'll see in a video game. But The Last of Us is an incredible game and definitely worth your time if you're a gamer. But obviously this is a movie podcast, and I'm looking at movies that are set in the PA genre. I know I've name dropped a lot of films here today. I've probably missed a lot out, like The Book of Eli and what else is there? Didn't really touch much on Escape from New York or Damnation Alley or The Ultimate Warrior. Because I have got a certain length of time I want to keep this podcast to, which is an hour. And so far, I think I'm on something like 47 minutes or 40 minutes. It's difficult to just talk without having anything prepared like I did yesterday. And this one seems to go a lot more. This seems to be a lot better because I'm using my brain. Yesterday I've paused a lot, which I apologize for, but I am trying to think of the movies I made. Like I said, I should have made a massive list of all the films to name drop. I mean, I'm not going to name drop hundreds of films for an hour. That's ridiculous. We'd be here for weeks if I did that. So what I'll do now for this last segment of the show is I'll give you a few recommendations based on different subgenres of this, different subgenres of this subgenre of science fiction and horror. So we'll break it up into the subgenres. So, like, recommendations for films that deal with post-nuclear fallout would be, like I mentioned, 5 from 1951, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil from 1958, The Last Man on Earth from 1964, which is the Vincent Price version of I Am Legend, Threads, The Day After. Oh, Miracle Mile. Miracle Mile is an incredible film. If you've not seen Miracle Mile, you should check that out ASAP. It's just been released on Blu-ray, I think, in the UK via Arrow Video, and I think maybe Shout Factory or Twilight Times have released it on Blu-ray in the US. Stars Anthony Edwards and Mare Winningham. She's got a fucking mouth you can't, like, a name you can't really pronounce. And it's like a race against the time type of thing to avoid World War III. War Games is another good film that tries to avoid World War III. So those would be the like post-nuclear sort of things. So yeah, like 5, World, the Flesh, and the Devil. What else was there? Last Man on Earth is more of a Last Man on Earth. I wouldn't say that's more of a virus type of movie. So I wouldn't add that to it. But yeah, those are the ones for like post-nuclear stuff. And you could also add The Day the World Ended, the Roger Corman monster movie from the 50s. That's another good one. So then you've got like the virus type of films, which would be a good one. Would be like I said, The Last Man on Earth, which is a vampire virus. Stakeland, another vampire virus film. Stakeland's incredible. It's a low-budget science fiction vampire movie set in a post-apocalyptic world, and it's such a good film. You should check that out. It's from the director and writer of Cold in July. That's what it's called. It's called Cold in July. Another good virus movie is the Japanese film. Kenji Fukasaku, I think, directed it, called Virus. It's got Sonny Chiba in it, and it's a co-production between Japan and the US. It's got Sonny Chiba, Edward James Olmos, Glenn Ford, Robert... I was going to say Robert Mugabe then. It's Robert Vaughn. But yeah, that's got a massive cast. It's only ever been released outside of Japan in an edited version. There is a 3-hour version available in Japan. I think it was released in the US in a box set with Sonny Chiba movies. But the one you can normally find online or on DVD, on budget DVDs in the UK and the US, is the 108-minute version, which does edit out a hell of a lot of film. But is it 108 or 118? I can't remember. It's a very, very heavily cut version of it. Another couple of films that are worth watching, virus-type films, are Contagion, the Steven Soderbergh film. That is a very cool film. That's probably one of the most realistic depictions of a viral outbreak worldwide. A lot better than that Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman from the 90s. It's a good film, The Outbreak, but like Contagion just like shits all over it. There was another one. There was another like a mini series made for television, which starred Tiffany Amber Thiessen. I can't remember what the name of that is. Maybe that was called Contagion as well. I'm not sure. But that was a decent one. So yeah, that's all I can really think of for virus films at the moment. There's some good 70s ones as well, like Damnation Alley. Damnation Alley stars Jean-Michel Vincent and George Peppard from the A-Team, set in a post America, and about some guys who used to work for the Air Force. And there's this really badass Land Cruiser that they drive from one side of America to the other side. There's giant scorpions in it. There's they go to Vegas, I think it's Vegas or maybe Reno, it's just covered in sand where they meet the scorpions. They meet a very, very young Jackie Earle Haley. And that's a pretty cool film. It's very 70s. It's kind of definitely aged now. What else is there? The Ultimate Warrior with Richard Harris and Yul Brynner. That's pretty good. It's very hard to find. If you can find it, then thumbs up. I know it got released on a double-sided DVD years and years and years ago, which is now out of print. With it was The Ultimate Warrior and Where Have All the People Gone, which is a TV movie from 1974, which starred Peter Graves from Mission Impossible. That's all right. You can find that on YouTube if you want to. More 70s, The Ravagers with Richard Harris and Ernest Borgnine. Like I mentioned, there is Logan's Run. To a degree, you could say Soylent Green was a apocalypse movie. I like to think of like Charlton Heston had a apocalypse trilogy, which would have been Planet of the Apes, Omega Man, and Soylent Green. But yeah, that's some good ones from the 70s. I'm drawing a blank because I'm trying hard to think of all these movies that I've watched and over the years and stuff. One from the 80s, which is also pretty cool, which is a low budget film called DEFCON 4, which is about these astronauts who return to Earth after a nuclear war to discover that the remaining survivors are all kids, and they've kind of taken on this like tribal sort of thing. It's all right. It's all right. There's a film from the early 80s. I think it's 1982 or maybe 1980 called Aftermath, which stars Sid Haig, which was advertised as a zombie film, I believe it was, when there's only one zombie in it. It's also a very, very bad film. It's an awful film, but that's Aftermath. You can avoid that if you want. A Japanese, there's Mamoru Oshii, who created Ghost in the Shell. He made a film in the mid-80s called Angel's Egg, which was an animated, post-apocalyptic animated movie. And it got released. There was what they tend to do. They did it with Shogun's Assassin. Shogun's Assassin was essentially, I think it was like the first 4 Lone Wolf and Cub like movies edited into one, went and then released in the US. What they did with Angel's Egg was that they released it as a film called Into the Aftermath, which intercut the animation with live action post-apocalyptic footage. I remember watching it one late night when I was young. I say I was young, I was very young. It was on TV. I watched it on a black and white TV. That wasn't very good. But Angel's Egg is fantastic. You should definitely watch Angel's Egg. If you can find it Into the Aftermath, and you're curious as to how it came about and what it looks like, then by all means go ahead and check it out. But I feel like I've waffled on and just name dropped like hundreds, maybe 100 or maybe 200 different titles in this subgenre of science fiction and horror. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much it for us. Coming in close to the end of the show, I will try. I'm currently, because I'm recording this on my phone in my bedroom. I haven't really got a very good setup downstairs. My computer is a bit out of whack, which I struggle to edit the audio on that to the point where like I don't know how I'm gonna manage it. But my microphone is shit. Therefore, I've unplugged it and it's now away. So I will be getting a new microphone, and I will find a way. I will find a way to involve more people in the Cine-Podcast. So yeah, thank you all for listening to me waffle for the last hour or so about post-apocalyptic movies. This actually went a lot better than the recording I did yesterday when I focused only on 5 movies. I'm kind of glad I did this again. I mean, this sounds a lot better. But yeah, cheers for tuning in and listening to episode 2 of the Cine-Podcast. And to play us out, I might do this every episode. To play us out is a song called Crawl Out Through the Fallout from 1960 by an artist by the name of Sheldon Allman, which apparently this song appears on one of the Fallout games. But yeah, to play us out is Crawl Out Through the Fallout by Sheldon Allman. Till next time, I've been Pete. Thanks for listening. This has been the Cine-Podcast. Have a good night.
Crawl out through the fallout, baby, when they drop that bomb. Crawl out through the fallout with the greatest of aplomb. When your white count's getting higher, hurry, don't delay. I'll hold you close and kiss those radiation burns away. Crawl out through the fallout, baby, to my loving arms, through the rain of strontium-90. Think about your hero when you're at ground zero, and crawl out through the fallout back to me. Crawl out through the fallout, baby, you know what I mean. Crawl out through the fallout, 'cause they said this bomb was clean. If you cannot find the way, just listen for my song. I'll love you all your life, although that may not be too long. Crawl out through the fallout, baby, to my loving arms, while those ICBMs keep us free. When you hear me call out, baby, kick the wall out and crawl out through the fallout back to me. 'Cause you'll be the only girl in the world. Why don't you crawl out through the fallout back to me? Why don't you crawl out through the fallout back to me? Why don't you crawl out through the fallout back to me?